Section 3 of Sir Francis Drake by Julian Corbett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Chapter 2, The Spanish Main, Part 1. In England the news of the disaster produced a profound sensation. It may be fairly said to mark the opening of a new book in the great epic of the Reformation. For the first time, the long commercial intimacy between England and Spain received a rude shock, and from that shock it pined and died. Hitherto the party in the council that believed England's true policy to be a policy of alliance with Spain had more than held their own, but on January 23rd, 1569, a weather-beaten man was riding post from Plymouth along the London road with the tidings which were destined at last to turn the scale. That man was Francis Drake. He had been the first to arrive from the perilous voyage. Since the fatal night he had seen nothing of his kinsman. He had put into Plymouth in great extremity, and in spite of his long privations had been dispatched by William Hawkins post haste to the council on the spot. It was in a critical moment that he came. Alarmed by the restlessness of the northern Catholics and the suspicious preparations which Philip's viceroy, the Duke of Alva, was making in the Netherlands, Elizabeth was taking care of a large treasure which had been chased into her ports by the Protestant rovers in the Channel. It was money borrowed to pay Alva's army, and the Spanish ambassador was loudly protesting. Determined not to let it go, the Queen was yet at her wits' end for an excuse for holding it back, and Drake reached the council doors in the nick of time. At the moment when the ambassador was pressing his claim with a cogency that was not to be resisted, he suddenly found himself recoiling before a new argument. For the Queen was parrying his home thrust with demands for an explanation of the outrage offered to her trusty merchant. Until satisfaction was given, she was flatly refusing to loose her hold on the treasure. A few days later Hawkins arrived in a worse case than Drake. At first he accused his kinsman of having deserted him, but in the official inquiry which was immediately held the accusation was not repeated. He had probably been satisfied with the explanation Drake would naturally have given him, that as he was already overloaded and short of provisions, he thought it his duty to get home as quickly as possible. Drake was not present at the inquiry. While he was waiting for the result of the Queen's demands for redress on behalf of her fellow adventurers, he took service in the navy. The Queen's retention of the treasure had been followed by embargoes on both sides. Trade with Spain was stopped, war with France was imminent, and Sir William Winter was sent out with a strong fleet under orders to relieve the French rebels in Rochelle and convey the English merchant fleets to the Baltic, where the swelling trade of the country had pushed a new outlet. It was under him that Drake probably served, and in his school learnt all that the royal service could teach. In the summer he got leave, and on July 4th was married to Mary Newman, a Devonshire girl who lived at St. Budeaux, close by the town of Plymouth. But he can have had but little leisure to enjoy his new happiness, for England was passing through one of the greatest crises of all her history, and everyone knew it. Men believed that the ensuing year would decide the fate of the Reformation, and a presentiment of coming evil hung over the nation. In the winter the insurrection of the northern Catholics prematurely exploded, and though it was easily smothered, the success of the government did little to relieve the situation. The dawn of the year 1570 was darkened with the threatening shadow of a crusade for the release of Mary Stuart. England resounded with warlike preparations. The forces of the south and west were mobilized. Every available ship was being brought forward for service, and John Hawkins was equipping a force which was supposed to be under orders to intercept the Plate fleet at the Azores. We see all England at this moment agitated by the rough gusts that herald the storm. We see her overshadowed with war clouds. The horizon blackens with coming danger, and like a gleam of hope, The white sails of 2 small vessels scudding westward out of Plymouth harbour detached themselves brightly against the surrounding gloom. The secrecy which shrouded this daring expedition is still impenetrable. It was only known that Francis Drake had sailed with 2 small vessels, the Dragon and the Swan, to reconnoitre the Spanish Indies, till he found at the very wellspring of her life a point where some terrible wound could be inflicted on England's enemy. In England it was always believed to be a private venture for revenge, which began and ended with Drake himself. Like Hawkins, he was burning to rescue from the clutch of the Inquisition the comrades of the last voyage who had fallen into the hands of the Spaniards. Diplomacy had failed to obtain redress for their losses, and both were bent on reprisals. Still, when we consider the demand there was at this moment for naval officers, with what care the intelligence department was being organized, and finally how the expedition was prepared under the eyes of Drake's old patron, William Hawkins, who was now governor of Plymouth, it is impossible to believe that the government was not in some way concerned. Without the incentive of a special mission, Drake would hardly have sailed while his old commander was hourly expecting to be loosed on the Plate fleet. And the truth most probably is that Hawkins had suggested the possibility of reprisals in the Indies, that his idea had been favourably received as being less likely to lead to an open rupture than action in Europe, and that he had employed Drake to secure the necessary information. In the following year the expedition was repeated with the Swan only. Whatever Drake did, and whatever he saw, the effect of these 2 adventurous voyages was to earn him a reputation for humanity with the Spaniards, and beget in him a magnificent contempt for their power. He returned with his head full of a scheme so wild in its daring that in the bare contemplation of its extravagance we seem transported into the world of the 7 champions. Spain bestrid the world like a colossus. Half Europe was crawling between its legs, and Drake was volunteering with a jest on his lips to steal the hen that laid the giant's golden eggs. The 2 years of danger through which the state had just passed had bred a spirit ripe to applaud such an enterprise. Elizabeth's excommunication and the discovery of the great Ridolfi plot had filled her with an ugly desire for retaliation both against Rome and Spain, and the relations between London and Madrid were strained once more to breaking point. Although at last she wisely smiled upon Alva's suggestion that they should kiss and be friends yet a little while, an adder's poison was under her lips. In deference to the proconsul's wishes, she refused any longer to harbour the savage de la Marck and his beggars of the sea under the guns of her Cinque Ports. But the governor of Plymouth received no orders to stay 2 wicked little craft, which under his very eyes were being fitted out with every device which the latest science could suggest. For Francis Drake had found friends to back his wild scheme, and on Whitsunday Eve, May 24th, 1572, he sailed out of Plymouth Sound on board the Pasha of 70 tons, and in his wake was the little Swan of 25, in command of his brother John. Another brother, Joseph, was with him too, and John Oxenham of tragic memory, and others whose names were destined to be not entirely lost in the coming blaze of brilliant reputations. The Spaniards always said the Queen was among those who subscribed the cost, but be that as it may, no ship in her navy was better furnished than these. In all respects they might have been Her Majesty's own men of war, and yet the whole project wears the air of a schoolboy's escapade. The crews, all told, men and boys, numbered but 73 souls. There was but one of them had reached the age of 30, and their modest end was nothing less than to seize the port of Nombre de Dios and empty into their holds the treasure house of the world. On his previous voyage, in the lonely depths of the Gulf of Darien, Drake had discovered a little landlocked bay, probably the lower Puerto Escondido, hidden harbour, marked on Keith Johnston's map. Here he had buried his surplus stores, and here on July 12th he hove to his tiny squadron. Secure in the solitude of these untrodden shores, he intended at his leisure to set up 3 dainty pinnaces, which he had brought from Plymouth in pieces, and with which the attack was to be made. No sooner, however, had his boat passed the narrow entrance of his hiding-place than he saw smoke rising out of the dense tropical forest in which it was embosomed. His fastness had been profaned, and after returning to the ships for more strength and arms, he went ashore and boldly plunged into the tangled vegetation to solve the mystery. Not a soul was to be seen, but a leaden tablet met his view, informing him that some prisoners whom last year, in defiance of all precedent, he had released instead of drowning, had betrayed his hiding-place, and that the Spaniards had removed his stores. One of his former crew had conducted a rover called Garrett to the spot, but in alarm to find the place had been discovered by the Spaniards, he had hurried away, and the only traces left of him were the kindly warning on the leaden tablet and the smouldering fire. But Drake was not so easily daunted. He had fixed on the spot for setting up his pinnaces, and he did not mean to leave it till they were afloat. The ships were brought in, a pentagonal entrenchment marked out on the shore, and all hands were soon hard at work clearing the ground about it and hauling the felled trees together to make an abattis for its defence. So protected, the carpenters next day got to work on the pinnaces, but it was only to be interrupted by the appearance of a suspicious squadron bearing straight for the harbour. It consisted of a ship, a caravel, and a launch or shallop. It proved to be nothing worse than a vessel of Sir Edward Horsey's, Captain James Rance, with 2 Spanish prizes in company. Ned Horsey had been a notable pirate in the old wild days when Mary was on the throne, and any man in his employ was not likely to prove bad company for a venture like the one in hand. No sooner had Rance heard what was in the wind than he begged to stand in with Drake, and the 2 rovers, with all the solemnity of ink and wax, drew up a deed of partnership. End of Section 3.